On October 14, 1898, in a dilapidated cabin on the outskirts of Welch, West Virginia, neighbors reported hearing the screams of a young girl. According to county records, when authorities arrived, she was covered in a strange white substance, her own blood, yet not red. The McDowell County logbook, entry 402A reads, "Found girl in white dress, unresponsive. No shoes. No tracks." It is one of the few surviving official documents from the case. The coroner's report, sealed for decades in the county archives, notes, "Neither poison, disease, nor malice could explain her condition." Property deeds show the cabin belonged to Elias Ashcroft, a coal miner of some repute and an alleged herbalist who supplemented his income with remedies not sanctioned by any physician. His daughter, Lillian Ashcroft, was 12 at the time. Local newspapers from October and November of 1898, the Welch Herald, the McDowell Gazette, carry brief mentions of a mysterious illness, but quickly move on to reports of mine collapses and harsh winter storms. Only one reporter, a young correspondent named Samuel Hensley, attempted a follow-up. His notes, found among his family's estate papers in 1973, are fragmentary. "White, endless white, she speaks in tongues we cannot hear. Neighbors dare not approach. The smell wasn't of death. It was of wet wool and milk gone sour. The kind of scent that lingers in a nursery left empty for decades, the way rooms rot when no one sings anymore." Hensley's notes suggest that those who entered the Ashcroft cabin in the days after the girl's collapse experienced dizziness, nausea, and a sense of being watched. In a 1961 interview with the McDowell Gazette, 83-year-old Lena Hartsfield recalled, "I remember the smell. It was thick and it made the air feel wrong. I never went near that place again. Not even in daylight." School records from the Welch District No. 3 list Lillian Ashcroft as present through mid-October, but no attendance is recorded after the 13th. No death certificate exists. The nearest doctor's ledger, Dr. Henry Willoughby, whose office still stands though abandoned, notes a case beyond medicine on October 14. The entry is cursive and hurried. "Girl presents white excretion, alert but unresponsive, family insists divine intervention." The doctor's later writings, tucked inside a 1912 medical journal in a private collection, hint at fear rather than clinical detachment. "I could not explain it. The girl, she is not ill, she is other." Neighbors whispered of the Ashcroft family's faith practices, citing hand-copied Bibles, forbidden verses, and nocturnal prayers. According to an excerpt from an 1897 church diary, a visitor from Bluefield wrote, "The Ashcrofts pray with such intensity, it feels as though the walls themselves bend toward them. Their daughter watches the fire, and her eyes see beyond the candlelight." It is impossible to determine whether these were exaggerations or careful observations, but they are the only hints of what the family endured and inflicted. County ledgers from 1898 show repeated entries for white stains on floor, no cause found in the Ashcroft property inspections. The sheriff's notes, recently declassified, mention neighbors claiming the girl screamed of things unseen, and that lights in the cabin moved without wind. No one recorded any physical intruders. The files end abruptly after November 2, 1898, with the chilling annotation, "Further observation deemed unnecessary." Archival psychiatric files from Welch Asylum, accessed through microfilm in 1989, include a series of interviews with children from surrounding families. One unnamed boy, no older than 10, recalls, "She wasn't punished for what she did, she was punished for remembering what they made her watch." Another notes that the Ashcroft cabin smells like milk gone sour and wool, echoing the Hartsfield testimony decades earlier. The reports suggest a systematic observation of children in the area, though no conclusions were drawn. The asylum files, labeled 1898A to 1898D, were never published and remain among the most disturbing materials in the county archive. Death records in McDowell County from 1898 to 1900 list no Ashcrofts. No burial plot, no headstone, no public memorial. Yet property tax ledgers from 1927 still list the Holloway family as active, despite no census data after 1925. In the margins of one ledger, a clerk scribbled, "See Ashcroft file." That file, the only surviving copy, was marked confidential, burned in part, and yet recovered in 1967 by a local historian. The document contains the unnerving observation, "They say babies born in that town didn't cry. Not once. Not ever. And if they did, the bells would ring." Descriptions of the Ashcroft home, preserved in a 1934 WPA survey of Welch, refer to its isolation, a single chimney, an overgrown yard, and windows like blank eyes. Visitors in later decades, a historian in 1987, 2 photographers in 1999, and a property assessor in 2006, reported inexplicable phenomena: doors that closed without wind, shadows stretching beyond light, a persistent chill even in August. One photographer's journal entry reads, "I went in, but the house wanted me to forget. I left my camera, my notes, something else left with me." Micro-twists appear in seemingly mundane details. Tax assessments list the property as abandoned but under private observation, and maps indicate a neighboring cabin, long demolished, was labeled Ashcroft Watchtower. The internal logic of fear is systemic. The family, the town, the archives all collude to obscure what happened. Hensley's notes end with a final haunting observation: the girl's blood was not red. It was all white. The walls drank it. And yet, despite decades, the story lingers. A 1973 field journal, rediscovered in a locked drawer at the McDowell Historical Society, describes an adult Lillian Ashcroft visiting her childhood cabin. She touched the wall, whispered names, smiled. Then the wind silenced her. The note adds, "To this day no birds land near the chimney. No matter the season. No matter the wind." The poetic dread of the scene, abandoned home, white-stained floor, whispers that may never be understood, underlines the horror of what is systematically erased from memory. County maps from the 1920s, cross-referenced with modern GIS data, show the cabin's location still marked as private property, uninhabited, yet constantly watched. Oral histories collected in the 1980s suggest that locals would avoid the path leading to the Ashcroft home, leaving markers and trees as if to ward off the unseen. One note from a 1982 survey reads, "If you pass this way, do not speak her name, and do not look behind the door." Even now, fragments of the file survive, fragments that suggest both systemic observation and a cruel moral lesson, that some children are punished not for deeds but for memory itself. Lillian Ashcroft's story is less a tale of illness and more a chronicle of surveillance, isolation, and fear codified into architecture, records, and rituals. The county archives, the ledgers, the field journals, all attest to what is real, even if never fully explained. Welch, West Virginia, sits at the confluence of coal veins and mist. In the late 1800s, it was a town built on black rock and labor, its streets narrow, lined with wooden shacks, churches, and the occasional miner's boarding house. By October 1898, when Lillian Ashcroft's condition became the whispered concern of neighbors, Welch was already a place of shadows. Census records from 1890 list the population at 3,142, yet maps show streets that never fully connected, roads that dead-ended into forests, and paths that disappeared into the hills. According to a 1912 WPA survey, the highway intended to connect Welch to the nearby town of Kimball was never completed, leaving the town trapped in its own geography. Coal had been both lifeblood and curse. Property tax ledgers from 1895 note dozens of foreclosures after pit collapses, and the McDowell Gazette reported in March of that year, families of the lower hills abandoned homes, work scarce, food scarcer. The Ashcroft cabin lay on the western edge, far from the coal veins, and yet close enough for the smell of damp earth and coal dust to drift in with the wind. Some residents recalled that even the trees grew twisted along the slopes, as though recoiling from the human settlements below. Local newspapers describe Welch as isolated, but their prose understates the reality. In 1897, the Welch Herald ran a feature titled, "A Town Forgotten by Progress," noting that telegraph lines never reached the western hills, and deliveries of medicine often took weeks. For children like Lillian Ashcroft, that meant sickness could linger without care, but for some, the isolation brought something far stranger than illness. Archival letters from a schoolteacher, Margaret Hensley, detail the peculiar quiet. Children whisper of things unseen. When a child disappears for a day, neighbors speak in hushed tones, and the hills absorb their voices. Geography amplified fear. The Tug Fork River cut through the valley like a dark ribbon, its waters rising with winter storms. Flood records from 1896 and 1897 show repeated inundation of lower homes, including 2 structures within a mile of the Ashcroft property. Residents built raised platforms, stone embankments, anything to stay above the rising waters, yet the topography remained unforgiving. Neighbors recounted that after floods, the hills seemed to hold the water longer than nature intended, puddles stagnating in depressions long after rainfall ceased. The environment itself appeared to conspire with the town's darkness. Oral histories collected in the 1980s provide glimpses into how Welch was perceived by outsiders. One account, from an itinerant photographer in 1938, reads, "The town looked normal until you walked past the river bend. Then the silence hit and the children stared too long. Their eyes are not the eyes of children." School enrollment ledgers from District Number 3 between 1895 and 1905 show multiple families vanishing entirely from records. No death certificates, no relocation notices, simply blank spaces where names once stood. Many of these disappearances were clustered along the western edge of Welch, near the Ashcroft cabin. Coal strikes and economic collapse compounded the isolation. In 1898, the Welch Coal Company faced litigation over unsafe shafts, and court records revealed dozens of minor deaths unreported in newspapers. Families moved to escape both the mines and the shadows they carried. One regional historian, citing a 1922 property assessment, noted, "Several plots remain registered to families who vanished decades prior. The law recognizes them, but the land itself refuses habitation." In other words, the town's decay was official but invisible, a record of presence without proof of life. Even the churches of Welch contributed to the sense of dread. Minutes from an 1898 Baptist congregation meeting, recovered in a 1974 county archive, record the Ashcrofts attending regularly, yet suggest unease. "The girl speaks to things no man can hear. We pray but the air thickens when they are here." Church basements stored relics, hymnals, and occasionally, unrecorded confessions. An entry in one pastor's notebook from November 1898 states, "I have sealed the basement ledger. I dare not transcribe what I saw. The child's room is untouched, but the air remembers." Visitors over the decades noted Welch's peculiar relationship with sound and time. A WPA interviewer in 1935 wrote, "The wind carries voices from the mines and the bells in the churches chime when no one pulls the ropes." Property records indicate that chimneys were maintained in certain houses long after their owners vanished. One 1927 tax ledger includes a curious note for the Ashcroft property: "Chimney smoke must be maintained even if residence is empty. Observation ongoing." No explanation exists. County medical records from the late 1890s describe a pattern of strange ailments and unexplained behavior among children in Welch's western neighborhoods. Dr. Henry Willoughby, the local physician who examined Lillian Ashcroft, logged similar cases: children who spoke backwards in sleep, refused to eat unless lights were extinguished, or sang hymns at odd hours without prompting. The files suggest not illness, but ritual or perhaps observation. While none of these children were as visibly afflicted as Lillian, the patterns hint at something systematic, something inherited, taught, or enforced. Even geography itself seems complicit. Modern maps, when compared to historical ones, reveal trails that no longer exist. Woods have reclaimed paths, hills have shifted slightly from erosion, and the river has altered course. Researchers in the 1970s found that if one follows the 1898 Ashcroft property maps exactly, they end up in a stand of trees marked with small stones, perhaps boundary markers, perhaps a warning. Oral histories suggest that locals would leave small carved symbols on these stones, signs to indicate which paths to avoid. And yet, the town never forgot. In the mid-20th century, when historical societies began documenting Welch, volunteers repeatedly noted the same strange phenomena: abandoned homes that felt alive, photographs where shadows did not align, and children who mimicked behaviors they had no reason to know. Field journals, preserved in the McDowell Historical Society, frequently referenced the Western Hills, the Ashcroft cabin, and the inexplicable whiteness associated with Lillian's story. It is a geography etched in memory, fear, and paperwork, maps, ledgers, and diaries all conspiring to maintain the silence. Even today, Welch's Western Hills are largely untraveled. GPS surveys confirm that paths from 1898 no longer correspond to accessible roads. Trees stand where streets once cut, rivers run differently, and chimneys, foundations, and fences still exist in fragments. The town's isolation is both physical and temporal, a place where events are recorded but never fully explained, a geography that preserves horror in its memory. The Ashcroft family existed at the edge of maps, census data, and memory. In 1890, federal census records list Elias Ashcroft, a 38-year-old coal miner, his wife Margaret, and 3 children, Lillian, Samuel, and Clara. By 1898, the county logbooks, school rosters, and tax ledgers show an incomplete picture. Lillian's presence is recorded until October 13. Samuel disappears from attendance rolls in late 1897, and Clara is last mentioned in a property ledger annotated with a single, unsettling word: observed. No death certificates, no relocation records, No public obituaries exist for the family. Property deeds from the period confirm the Ashcroft cabin's location in the western hills of Welch. The structure appears in tax ledgers from 1889 through 1927, despite the apparent absence of inhabitants. One ledger entry from March 1912 reads, Ashcroft Elias, property maintained, residence status unknown. Observation ongoing. In the margins, a clerk scrawled, see files 1898A through D. These files, partially destroyed in a courthouse fire in 1947, include handwritten notes on Lillian's strange condition, her family's religious practices, and cryptic observations on the behavior of children in the neighborhood. Neighbors remembered the Ashcrofts as private and peculiar. Oral histories collected in the 1970s describe a family that rarely interacted with others, yet was impossible to ignore. In a 1974 interview, retired miner Jacob Whitaker recalled, you'd see them in the yard sometimes, hands raised, whispering at nothing. The children, they weren't like other children. Quiet. Watching. Waiting. These recollections align with school logs indicating that Lillian and her siblings often avoided group activities, sitting apart, humming to themselves, or tracing symbols in their notebooks. Archival court records from McDowell County in 1895 mention Elias Ashcroft in a minor dispute over property lines, but the filings hint at more than land contention. A clerk's note reads, Ashcroft family practices rituals, neighbors complain of noises at night, children speaking in tongues. Further action deferred pending investigation. No follow-up report survives. The Ashcrofts were already disappearing from the public record, their lives intersecting with bureaucracy only to vanish within it. The family's religious practices are partially reconstructed through hand-copied Bibles, sermon notes, and church minutes. One verse, altered in the Ashcroft family copy of the Book of Isaiah, replaces blood with white water, a modification consistent with the strange affliction reported in Lillian. A surviving 1897 diary entry from Margaret Ashcroft states, the girl sees what the rest cannot. I fear her eyes may never rest. These private documents suggest a household steeped in rituals that blurred faith and fear, devotion and control. Medical records reveal that Dr. Henry Willoughby visited the family multiple times in October 1898. His notes describe symptoms he cannot categorize. Excretion is white, colorless. Pulse normal, temperature stable. Alert yet unresponsive in speech. Parents insist it is divine, no malice intended. Letters between Willoughby and a colleague in Charleston hint at his unease. I do not understand. I cannot explain. The child's blood is not blood, yet it flows. Something here is beyond medicine. School ledgers from District No. 3 reflect the Ashcroft children's irregular attendance. Lillian's last entry is October 13th. Samuel and Clara show sporadic appearances with cryptic comments by teachers. Observe drawing symbols on slates, muttering unfamiliar hymns, and eyes fixed on corners of the room where nothing exists. County inspectors noted that the children were healthy in appearance, yet carried an aura that unsettled those around them. One handwritten inspector note reads, the family home emits a chill that is not weather. In 1901, a letter from a neighbor found in a box of private correspondence in Welch Historical Society archives claims, they were gone one morning. The children, the parents, not a trace. The cabin stood, doors closed, smoke from the chimney gone. Nothing left but the white stains on the floor. Property tax ledgers, however, continued to list the Ashcroft home as active. The discrepancy between legal record and lived reality underscores the family's elusiveness, a presence recognized only on paper, yet invisible in life. Later interviews with surviving residents of Welch, conducted in the 1960s and 1970s, hint at rumors circulating about the Ashcrofts. One woman, now deceased, recounted, Elias would sometimes come to the edge of town with his children. They wore white dresses, always white. No one approached. I remember seeing Lillian staring into the distance, and she seemed too old, too knowing for a child her age. These recollections, cross-referenced with archival newspapers and asylum files, suggest that the family's reputation extended beyond the immediate neighborhood, reaching into regional consciousness, even if only as whispers. An unusual feature of the Ashcroft family is their repeated appearance in records decades later, though never in person. Court filings from 1922 and 1930 reference the Ashcroft property, and occasionally the Ashcroft estate, in contexts that imply oversight or surveillance. A notation in one probate file reads, property maintained, no living heirs located. Observe for anomalies. This documentation, though detached from human presence, preserves the family's footprint in law and bureaucracy, echoing the way the town itself preserves the horror of their existence. Archival psychiatric records hint at intergenerational observation. Children from neighboring families were occasionally recorded as mimicking Ashcroft behaviors, humming unfamiliar hymns, drawing strange symbols, or refusing to cry. One asylum report, dated 1902, states, subjects report seeing the white child in dreams. Some imitate her behavior unconsciously. Community perception of Ashcroft presence remains strong, despite absence. These notes suggest that the Ashcrofts' influence persisted, an imprint of fear and ritual inscribed upon the children of Welch. Even physical evidence survived in fragments. Photographs from the 1930s show the cabin standing alone in the western hills, roof sagging, windows shuttered. Shadows in the photographs do not align with sunlight. A stone well at the side of the house remains intact, surrounded by overgrown brush, with water that appears white in the faded images. Observers decades later commented that the smell around the cabin was thick, wet, and metallic, though no natural source could account for it. The Ashcroft family, then, is a lineage recorded only in ledger entries, diaries, and whispers. They vanish from the tangible world while persisting in the archives. Every official record, census data, tax ledgers, court filings, carries their name, yet every personal account emphasizes absence. Children watching from windows, doors closing without wind, candles flickering without breeze. Their story is not of life or death, but of memory and erasure, codified in paper and myth alike. The Ashcrofts' beliefs were as meticulous as they were secretive, etched into the margins of hand-copied Bibles, whispered in empty rooms, and enacted in the dim light of their cabin. Church records from Welch, West Virginia, provide glimpses of their doctrine, though never fully documented. In a 1897 Baptist congregation ledger, a pastor wrote, "Ashcroft family attends, yet the air thickens when they are present. Prayers linger longer than human breath." It is clear that their faith was not merely practiced. It was observed, studied, enforced. Handwritten family Bibles, recovered from a distant relative's estate in 1962, contain marginalia that confound scholars. Verses are altered, blood becomes white water, sins become echoes, children become watchers. Margaret Ashcroft's notes, penned in a delicate, looping hand, indicate that the family ritualized observation of their children. They must see, yet not speak. They must hear, yet not respond. The eyes record what hands may never touch. These alterations suggest a doctrine built on control, memory, and fear, rather than salvation. Field journals from 1898, rediscovered in 1973 in a private collection, describe evenings in the Ashcroft home where children were led through exercises of repetition, silence, and song. An entry reads, "They chant, soft at first, then louder. Lillian sings a hymn backward. Clara traces symbols on the floor. The air itself feels resistant." Teachers from District No. 3 recorded that the children often hummed tunes no one else recognized, patterns that repeated nightly. School inspectors noted that the Ashcroft children rarely spoke directly to others, instead communicating in whispers, gestures, and symbols copied from their home rituals. Punishment, when applied, was cryptic. Psychiatric records from Welch Asylum include interviews with children who observed the Ashcrofts. "She wasn't punished for what she did, she was punished for remembering what they made her watch," one child noted in 1902. These children, often terrified, reported being taken to the cabin's basement, where they were asked to kneel before faintly drawn symbols on the walls. The symbols, resembling letters from a lost alphabet, were catalogued in the asylum files as unknown script, possibly family-specific or ritualistic. Local folklore, documented in the 1960s by oral historian Margaret Holloway, suggests that these practices were not entirely private. Neighbors recalled seeing candles burning late into the night, strange shadows passing behind drawn curtains, and children carrying small, carefully wrapped objects from the cabin. One neighbor, interviewed in 1964, described a bundle of herbs, chalk, and folded papers. "I saw her bring them out, whispering, then disappear into the hills. We never saw what became of it, but sometimes white dust would appear on our windowsills." These bundles were never recovered, yet recurring references in letters, diaries, and tax ledgers imply they were a part of Ashcroft ritual life. A particularly revealing document comes from a pastor's notebook dated November 1898, describing the aftermath of Lillian's illness. "I descended into the basement, hoping to understand. The walls bore stains, not blood, yet white. The girl's belongings lay untouched. I dared not proceed further. The air hummed with a presence I cannot name. This account parallels the observations recorded in Hensley's 1898 notes and Drive Willoughby's medical reports, creating a pattern that suggests the family rituals were at once spiritual, practical, and profoundly disturbing. The Ashcrofts' rituals extended to the domestic environment. Property ledgers from 1895 to 1898 note repeated cleaning and rearrangement of the cabin interior, particularly the basement and nursery. One ledger entry reads, "Chalk markings observed on floor, removed, cleaned, replaced. Objects arranged per family ordinance." Archaeological surveys of the Western Hills, conducted in 1978, confirmed traces of chalk in small pits near the foundation, remnants of practices impossible to fully reconstruct. Scholars speculate that these spaces functioned as classrooms, laboratories, or stages for the enactment of doctrine. Even the family's dietary practices seem to have been ritualized. Margaret Ashcroft's diary, alongside Dr. Willoughby's notes, records a series of fasts and offerings, meals omitted for days, water consumed exclusively from a specific stream, herbs administered at precise intervals. "The body must learn to obey the unseen," she wrote, "and the blood will follow its own instruction." These prescriptions are echoed in later interviews with elderly Welsh residents, who recalled the Ashcroft children appearing frail, yet unnaturally resilient, often wandering the hills regardless of weather, hunger, or illness. Symbols were central to the family's doctrine. Excerpts from the 1898 asylum records describe children drawing triangles, circles, and interlaced patterns in classrooms and fields. The symbols correspond closely with chalk traces found in the Ashcroft cabin decades later. Investigators hypothesize that these glyphs functioned as mnemonic devices, connecting memory, ritual, and control in a system both internal to the family and subtly imposed on the surrounding community. Despite this meticulous observation, the family maintained an outward appearance of normalcy. Church attendance, minimal interaction with neighbors, and routine domestic activity masked the systematic nature of their rituals. Archival correspondence between pastors and town officials in 1898 conveys unease. The Ashcrofts behave as any family might, yet an unseen weight pervades their home. Children speak in odd ways, parents watch with intensity. What is unseen is perhaps more real than what is seen. These fragments, pieced together from diaries, letters, and ledgers, create a consistent internal logic. The family's devotion to ritual was total, obsessive, and enduring. Even after the family's disappearance from public view in 1898, echoes of their practices persisted. Reports from neighboring children, court filings, and property inspections throughout the early 20th century reference similar patterns: symbolic chalk, fasting, whispered incantations, and repeated observation. One 1923 tax ledger notes, "Ashcroft property maintained, previous rituals to continue. Observation recommended." These fragments suggest that the rituals were not merely familial but recursive, embedding themselves in the landscape, in local consciousness, and in legal documents. And so, the Ashcrofts' beliefs were never fully private, nor fully public. They were written in marginalia, murmured in church basements, inscribed in the air of the Western Hills, and recorded in documents that survive only in fragments. They haunt the town as persistently as the cabin itself, a set of instructions, observations, and warnings encoded in objects, words, and the land. It was in mid-October 1898, just days after the first whispers of Lillian Ashcroft's condition reached county authorities, that the outside world began to take notice. The Welsh Herald, a small weekly paper, ran a brief notice on October 16. "Mysterious illness afflicts child in Western Hills, cause unknown." The article is terse, almost clinical. Neighbors report disturbances in the Ashcroft household. Physicians dispatched. No cause as yet determined. Yet the public, conditioned by the harshness of coal town life, paid little attention. Mines collapsed, crops failed, storms arrived. The girl's story was a footnote, easily ignored, except for a few who recognized its strangeness. Samuel Hensley, a young reporter for the McDowell Gazette, attempted to follow up. His notes, discovered in 1972 among family papers, offer the first extended outsider account. Arriving at the Ashcroft property, he wrote, "I noted the air felt thick, almost viscous. The girl lay upon a pallet of wool, her hair matted, eyes wide yet unseeing. There was a white substance on her hands on the floor. I cannot describe it. Neither doctor nor law seemed able to explain." Hensley's handwriting falters, the words slanting downward across the page as though weighed by fear. School records corroborate the timeline. Lillian Ashcroft attended Welch District No. 3 until October 13. The following days show gaps in attendance, with a teacher's log noting, Absent, medical concern. No further details were given, but in cross-referencing the county coroner's report with Dr. Willoughby's office ledger, it is evident that the events of October 14th and 15th marked the first formal acknowledgement of the girl's condition by professional authorities. Neighbors described an escalating pattern of abnormality. In a 1961 oral history interview for the McDowell Gazette, Lena Hartsfield, who lived near the Ashcroft property, recalled, "The screaming. It wasn't a normal cry, it sounded like her body was trying to speak, to tell something. And the wind, it carried it down the hills. Everyone knew something was wrong, but no one dared intervene." These oral histories align with fragments in the county logbook, entry 402A, which records, "Girl found in white dress, unresponsive. No shoes. No tracks. Parents cooperative but anxious." A physician's letter, rediscovered in 1967 in the Charleston Medical Archives, offers insight into the medical community's first confrontation with the unknown. Dr. Willoughby writes, "I have seen maladies strange and rare, yet none like this. No poison, no contagion. Pulse regular. Temperature stable. Yet excretion is entirely white. I fear for her mind, yet I fear more for the understanding of her body." His reports suggest both fascination and terror, a duality mirrored in every record that touches the Ashcroft family. The event attracted not only medical attention but also legal scrutiny. Court filings in November 1898 reference a formal inquiry into the Ashcroft household, prompted by neighbor complaints, noise at night, children behaving oddly, white matter observed on floor. The filings include sworn affidavits, some of which survive in fragmented microfilm, statements from neighbors, teachers, and a midwife named Clara Jennings. Jennings notes, "The girl is not ill in the common sense. Her body betrays her, yet it is as though her spirit resists." The language mirrors that of the coroner's report, blending scientific observation with folklore, a duality that pervades all surviving records. Photographs from the era are scarce, but one daguerreotype discovered in 1984 in the attic of a neighboring property shows Lillian in a white dress, standing stiffly in the doorway of the cabin. The image is blurred, the edges darkened, yet her eyes seem to fix directly on the lens. An archivist noted, "There is an intensity in her gaze, too knowing for her age. It unsettles viewers even decades later." The photograph has since been sealed in the McDowell Historical Society's collection, accessed only under special permission, its power lingering even in shadowed archival rooms. Neighbors' letters, preserved in private collections, emphasize the community's reaction. One, dated October 20, 1898, reads, "I dare not go near the Ashcroft house. The girl's cries stopped only when I approached the door. No one else enters. The family remains locked in with whatever is inside." Another letter, from a different correspondent, recounts strange behavior in the hills surrounding the cabin. "I saw lights move across the windows at midnight. Not candlelight. Something else. Shadows that do not correspond to the trees outside." The letters capture both curiosity and terror, blending observation with rumor. The public event, insofar as one could call it that, was as much about recognition as it was about acknowledgement of the unexplainable. Archival documents show that county sheriffs visited the property twice in October, making notes of unusual substances on the floor, and children unresponsive but conscious. The sheriff's diary reads, "Parents insist this is divine. I'm not convinced yet dare not question further. The cabin seems aware of our presence." These words, paired with Hensley's reports, suggest a tension between official duty and primal fear, the kind of hesitation that can haunt generations. By late October, newspapers stopped reporting in detail, though whispers spread in neighboring counties. In January 1899, a local historian writing for the McDowell Gazette described the Ashcroft household as the source of unexplained phenomena, where children walk between worlds, and the line between illness and ritual is erased. These accounts, now corroborated by surviving logbooks, photographs, and letters, establish the October 1898 events as a turning point, the moment the outside world first saw, in fragments, what had always existed in the margins of Welch. Even decades later, the memory of the event persists. Field notes from a 1973 investigation into Welch's Western Hills report. Residents still speak in hushed tones about the Ashcroft children. The cabin stands abandoned yet alive. Visitors report white stains in the floorboards, traces that appear and disappear inexplicably. The story is not dead, it moves with the wind in the hills. It is as though the event, once noticed, never truly ended. By the end of 1898, The Ashcroft household had become a locus of unease in Welch, West Virginia. While outsiders documented the initial event, the witnesses closest to the family, neighbors, schoolchildren, and even distant relatives, recorded fragments that hint at a reality too strange to be wholly acknowledged. These testimonies, scattered across coroner's reports, school logs, asylum files, and private letters, offer glimpses of what the Ashcrofts saw, felt, and perhaps endured themselves. The first and most detailed accounts come from children who had observed the Ashcrofts at play or school. In a series of interviews conducted at Welch Asylum in 1902, several boys and girls described Lillian and her siblings in almost identical terms. One boy, unnamed in the asylum ledger, said, "She moves like the wind doesn't touch her. She watches always. Sometimes she hums a song nobody taught her." Another child added, "Clara draws circles in the dirt. Samuel whispers to the trees. They are quiet when adults are near, but the woods answer them." These records suggest a pattern: children acting under invisible rules, their behaviors chronicled by those who feared the unknown. School logs provide additional corroboration. Teachers noted that the Ashcroft children often sat apart, tracing symbols on slate boards and murmuring phrases in languages no one recognized. One ledger entry, October 12, 1898, states, "Lillian traced shapes on slate resembling letters from unknown alphabets. Appears focused on unseen entities. Other children frightened." These seemingly mundane observations, catalogued alongside attendance and grades, now resonate with an underlying dread: the daily life of a family observed, controlled, and perhaps haunted. Neighboring families recalled subtle, eerie interactions. Oral histories collected in the 1960s include statements like, "I once saw the girl standing by the riverbank, arms raised, eyes closed. The wind shifted, and the river rose as if responding." Another recollection, "Samuel disappeared for hours, then returned with nothing in his hands, mud on his boots, but his shoes were dry. He wouldn't speak of it, just stared." These accounts, though anecdotal, are remarkably consistent, suggesting a shared experience remembered by multiple witnesses across decades. Adults who observed the Ashcrofts documented what they could, though fear and social pressure often limited the depth of their reports. Clara Jennings, a midwife who visited the home in October 1898, left a detailed letter describing her encounter. "The girl lies in a white dress, eyes fixed, body calm yet trembling. I cannot say she suffers, yet something commands her, and perhaps all who dwell here. I dare not question, for even my presence feels intrusive." Jennings' letter was hidden in a drawer for 70 years, finally surfaced during a historical society cataloging project, and its contents have never been fully reconciled with other documents. The asylum files from 1902 contain a particularly chilling entry from a boy who had played briefly with Lillian and her siblings. "They taught me songs I cannot forget. When I sing them, shadows move behind my eyes. The girl said I would forget soon, but the wind would remember." Notes in the margin, likely by the interviewer, read, "Statements reflect impression, but not delusion. Witness insists memories are real, though cannot explain them." This underscores the uncanny nature of the Ashcrofts' influence. Both remembered and erased, imprinted in those who came into contact with them. Legal documents hint at the broader impact. In a minor 1898 neighbor dispute over property boundaries, affidavits describe interactions with the Ashcroft children. "They speak little, but sometimes laugh at things unseen. We fear for our own safety in their presence, as if the land itself obeys them." Another affidavit adds, "When we approached the cabin, a chill passed through the group. One child, Lillian, fixed her gaze upon us. We retreated. The wind followed." These filings, preserved in fragments, suggest that witnesses felt compelled to document the extraordinary, even as the law offered no recourse for understanding it. Several family members themselves became witnesses before disappearing entirely. A letter from Margaret Ashcroft, dated November 1, 1898, addressed to an unnamed relative, reads, "The children must see and remember. I fear what they will bring back, yet the path is theirs. We are observers, and perhaps the last witnesses to our own undoing." The words imply awareness of forces beyond control, the weight of ritual and inheritance pressing upon those who enacted it. This letter, hidden in private correspondence until the 1970s, confirms that even the parents perceived the strangeness surrounding their family. Medical observations reinforce these personal accounts. Dr. Willoughby, writing in October 1898, notes, "The children appear unaffected physically, yet attention underlies their movements, a vigilance beyond their years. Eyes shift rapidly, whispers accompany gestures invisible to others. I fear the observations I make alter nothing, for the family operates on a plane I cannot chart. His reports blend clinical detachment with poetic dread, reflecting the impossibility of categorizing what he saw. The witnesses' narratives converge in a singular, haunting theme. Presence and absence are intertwined. Lillian, Samuel, and Clara left marks on memory, property, and official records, yet remained elusive, never fully visible to outsiders. Letters, court filings, oral histories, and asylum interviews collectively form a lattice of evidence. Fragile, fragmented, yet persistent. Each record acts as both a warning and a memorial, preserving the children's reality while underscoring the limits of understanding. Even decades later, those who grew up near the western hills of Welch report residual echoes. A 1964 interview with Lena Hartsfield recalls, "The girl would appear in dreams. Or perhaps it was waking. I saw her across the hills, standing in white. My memory is unsure if it was Lillian or the shadow of what she left behind." Field notes from the McDowell Historical Society corroborate such statements, citing multiple accounts of shadowed figures in the hills, often coinciding with locations linked to the Ashcroft property. And so, the witnesses remain, not fully recorded, not fully explained, yet impossible to ignore. Their observations, preserved in archival fragments, suggest that the Ashcroft family's influence extended beyond their own lives, embedding itself into the consciousness of a town and its children. The testimony is scattered, indirect, and sometimes contradictory, yet a consistent pattern emerges. The presence of something inhumanly aware, a family that observed as much as it was observed, leaving witnesses forever changed. By the winter of 1898, the Ashcroft story had begun to ripple outward, attracting the attention of neighbors, journalists, and officials. Yet with each inquiry the trail grew more opaque. Records, letters, and oral testimony suggest a deliberate effort to contain knowledge, to silence the whispers before they became too loud. The forces behind this suppression were subtle but persistent. Sheriffs, pastors, journalists, and occasionally distant state officials. Together, they wove a web that obscured the Ashcrofts' existence, their rituals, and the horrors witnessed by the town. County Sheriff James McAllister appears repeatedly in surviving logbooks from October and November 1898. His handwriting is precise, almost ritualistic, yet his notes convey unease. Visited Ashcroft property. Family cooperative but insistent on privacy. Observed white substance on floors, children unresponsive but coherent. Caution advised. Limit inquiry. Records to remain sealed. McAllister's directive, limit inquiry, is repeated across multiple entries, suggesting a conscious effort to shield the family from scrutiny. Whether this was motivated by fear, respect, or tacit complicity remains unclear. The local press too played a role. After initial coverage by the Welch Herald and the McDowell Gazette, subsequent editions omit Lillian Ashcroft entirely. A review of microfilm archives reveals that by December 1898, the story was reduced to a single vague notice in the classifieds, "Family under observation, no further comment." Journalists of the era occasionally referenced unusual happenings in the Western Hills, yet no byline ever identified a reporter willing to pursue the case in depth. Surviving correspondence between editors, found in the 1970s in private collections, shows deliberation. The Ashcroft story attracts curiosity. Too dangerous to follow. Remove from press and files where possible. Church leaders also appear to have suppressed the narrative. Minutes from the 1898 Baptist congregation record the Ashcrofts' attendance and note their peculiar behaviors, but all subsequent references are scrubbed in the ledgers by hand. One entry, partially erased but still legible, reads, "Child manifests strange signs. Elders consult privately. Public record to be maintained as routine attendance." Oral histories suggest that the pastor ordered church members not to discuss the family outside of service, creating a collective code of silence. The intersection of faith and fear produced a hierarchy of secrecy. What could not be explained was to be unspoken. State and county records from the early 20th century further illustrate the systematic suppression. The courthouse fire of 1947 destroyed several hundred pages of property deeds, court filings, and coroner's reports, including portions of the Ashcroft file. Surviving fragments, however, indicate deliberate annotations, files to remain sealed. Observation ongoing. Later archivists and interviews conducted in the 1970s note that the courthouse itself seemed to preserve the Ashcroft narrative selectively. Pages removed or burned appear to correspond precisely with incidents linked to the family, while unrelated documents remained untouched. Suppression extended beyond official channels. Local residents, particularly those with proximity to the Western Hills, rarely spoke of the Ashcrofts. In oral interviews collected during the 1960s, elderly townspeople recounted that even mentioning the family aloud could result in cold stares or veiled warnings. One former teacher noted, "We spoke in whispers about Lillian. Those who asked too many questions suddenly moved away." The town doesn't forgive curiosity. These accounts suggest that suppression was not merely bureaucratic. It was social, enforced through silence, intimidation, and the memory of past disappearances. Legal suppression, in particular, left a trace of bureaucratic unease. In 1898, filings related to neighbor disputes and complaints about unusual behavior were systematically annotated with phrases such as sealed, limited inquiry, and do not publish. Anomalous court entries from the McDowell County records include notes like, "Witness testimony deemed inadmissible due to potential distress to child. File closed." These legal maneuvers, while appearing procedural, indicate an understanding that the Ashcroft case extended beyond ordinary jurisdiction, that documentation itself posed a risk to those who handled it. Archival letters and diaries reveal the human dimension of suppression. A midwife, Clara Jennings, wrote in 1898, "I have been warned not to speak of what I saw. The girl's condition is extraordinary. Yet the fear is not hers, it is ours. The town protects itself by forgetting." Similarly, Dr. Willoughby's medical notes emphasize restraint. "I am instructed to report only minimally. Scientific curiosity is tempered by the social reality. Too much inquiry may endanger both observer and observed." Across professions and generations, witnesses were trained, coerced, or persuaded into silence. Even physical traces of the Ashcrofts were controlled. Land inspections in the 1920s note that the cabin remained standing, yet access was restricted by property overseers acting on instructions from unnamed officials. Archaeological surveys in the 1970s found fragments of chalk markings, pieces of hand-copied scripture, and other ritual remnants, but permission to excavate deeper was denied. A notation in one survey log reads, "Potential for harm if disturbed. Leave as found. Documentation only." The act of preservation itself became a method of suppression. Protect the evidence without allowing it to reveal its full story. The pattern of suppression is reflected in contemporary reports of the Ashcroft influence. Field notes from the 1960s and 1970s consistently reference lingering traces. Shadows in the cabin move contrary to light. Children report songs and images they cannot explain. The hills themselves appear to resist mapping or development. Each instance echoes the original effort to contain knowledge. A town, a legal system, a clergy, and neighbors acting collectively to erase, obscure, and control. Suppression, however, was never total. Fragmentary evidence persists. Logbooks, microfilmed newspapers, letters, photographs, oral histories, and diaries. They form a lattice of understanding, incomplete but powerful. What was silenced in life survives in paper, memory, and archival residue. The Ashcroft story continues to haunt, both because of what was done and what was left undone. The incomplete record becoming a vessel for dread, speculation, and revelation. Decades have passed, yet the Ashcroft cabin persists on the western hills of Welch, West Virginia, a structure both present and somehow absent, as if the land itself resists its erasure. Property deeds and tax ledgers list the home as active well into the 1930s, even after no living Ashcroft could be accounted for. Visitors over the years, historians, surveyors, curious locals, have described the cabin with a vocabulary of unease. Wrong angles, doors that do not align with their frames, shadows that move against the light. The house stands, physically intact, yet it carries a memory, a weight that does not belong to walls or roof alone. Field notes from 1987 document the first modern attempt to observe the property in daylight. An archivist from the McDowell Historical Society, accompanied by 2 graduate students, wrote, "The cabin sits atop a knoll, surrounded by brush that seems deliberately dense. Approaching it, the air thickens. Birds avoid the chimney, small animals flee before contact. The house exudes a quiet that is not stillness but waiting." Inside, traces of chalk remain faintly on the floorboards, arranged in circles and triangles that matched symbols in Margaret Ashcroft's diaries. Old furniture leaned at impossible angles, and a single cracked mirror reflected more than its surroundings. The archivist noted an indistinct white shape moving behind them. Later visits in 1999 reveal that the cabin's anomaly extends beyond architecture. A local journalist, seeking photographs for a historical retrospective, wrote in a personal journal, "The light shifts unnaturally inside the rooms. Shadows stretch in directions they shouldn't. Every photo taken shows an irregular white haze, as though the air itself remembers the Ashcroft presence. When one of the assistants entered the basement, the same space where children were said to have knelt in ritual, she returned visibly shaken, muttering, "I don't know what I saw, but the house knows we're here." Her handwriting, preserved in the field journal, trembles across the page, capturing terror in script. Even casual visitors experience an affective disturbance. Oral interviews from locals in 2006 describe hikers who attempted to traverse the hill behind the property. One man recounted, "I could see the cabin, but it wasn't right. Windows looked like eyes. The door seemed taller than it was the day before. And the wind, it carried whispers I couldn't understand." These experiences, recorded decades after the family's disappearance, suggest that the house is less a building and more a living repository of memory, ritual, and trauma, retaining a presence tied directly to the Ashcroft family's influence. Historical preservation files emphasize the peculiar continuity of the house. Structural reports note minimal decay despite age and exposure. Property surveys document rusted hinges, warped planks, and intact chimneys. Archaeologists attempting minor digs in the yard were stopped by officials citing property restrictions. Survey logs from 1978 read, "Ground disturbance deferred. Potential for anomaly. Observe only. Limit exposure." In other words, the cabin remained, yet unseen and untouchable, a frozen stage where past rituals linger. Visitors often report subtle sensory experiences that defy natural explanation. A 1999 archivist recorded, "Smell of wet wool and milk gone sour." The house exhales its memory, a kind of perfume that recalls children kneeling, whispering. It's neither disease nor decay, but history made corporeal. Such observations are consistent with oral accounts collected over the past century, indicating that the house itself preserves the Ashcroft imprint. The memory of ritual, observation, and fear is embedded into its very walls, as though the structure has been conditioned to record its inhabitants' practices. Even the landscape surrounding the house contributes to its unnatural reputation. Trees lean away from the structure, earth around the foundation is unusually dry, and water sources nearby are often clouded with a white sediment reminiscent of Lillian's affliction. Archival notes from a 1962 survey document that the nearby stream bears residue consistent with chalk and mineral deposits, potentially related to ritual activity. Further study inadvisable. Environmental anomalies, recorded consistently, reinforce the idea that the house exerts influence not only over memory and imagination but also over matter itself. Visitors' interactions with the house consistently report changes in perception. In a 2006 exploration, a graduate student noted, "We entered together. Within minutes, our sense of direction failed. The walls seemed to shift, doors were no longer where we remembered. Each step echoed with the past but not ours." Another observer reported that light sources, flashlights and sun, refracted unpredictably, casting shadows that moved counter to natural angles. These experiences align with historical descriptions of the Ashcroft children's behaviors, a world subtly governed by unseen rules, enacted inside the house and echoed in the environment. Archival photographs provide the most haunting evidence. In images taken in 1987 and 1999, researchers noted a persistent white haze in the windows and doorways, often appearing more pronounced in the spaces associated with the children's rituals. The haze does not correspond to fog, smoke, or dust, and digital analysis in the 2000s confirmed that it was not a photographic artifact. It is as if the house preserves and projects a memory, the white presence of Lillian and her siblings, a tangible trace of what once occurred. The Ashcroft cabin then is not merely a home. It is a container, a vessel for memory, ritual, and dread, preserved across generations. The house stands in defiance of time, law, and human understanding, a tangible witness to events that continue to echo long after those who enacted them have disappeared. Scholars, journalists, and locals alike report that entering the house is to engage with history as a living, breathing entity, a place where observation becomes interaction, memory becomes material, and presence defies absence. The Ashcrofts were never truly alone. Archival research, cross-referencing school rosters, property records, and court filings from neighboring counties, reveals a disturbing pattern: families with similar behaviors, symbols, and rituals scattered throughout the Appalachian region. These were not isolated incidents, but threads in a network that extended beyond Welch, West Virginia, tracing the same shadowed logic that governed the Ashcroft household. Census records from 1900 show a striking anomaly. In McDowell, Mercer, and Raleigh counties, families with names such as Holloway, Stalworth, and Fairchild appear intermittently in the official documents, then vanish without explanation. Property ledgers indicate the maintenance of homes long after the occupants disappeared or were no longer listed. School rosters include children with matching handwriting and symbols identical to those found in the Ashcroft diaries. These overlaps suggest a ritualized culture extending across families, a kind of encoded tradition transmitted quietly from house to house. The Holloways, living 15 miles west of Welch, drew attention in field notes from 1962. Residents reported chalk symbols on floors, unexplained noises, and children who spoke in whispers of things that watch. A diary entry from 1910 notes, "I caught Thomas drawing triangles in the mud. When questioned, he only smiled. I feared what he might recall." These triangles match exactly the shapes discovered decades later in the Ashcroft cabin, raising questions about whether these families shared doctrine, bloodlines, or something more intangible. Court records provide further evidence of pattern repetition. In 1918, a small claims case in Mercer County documents a dispute between neighbors over ritual markings near a farmhouse. The affidavit reads, "Children observed drawing symbols identical to those described in Welch case, same chalk, same positions. Adults claim this is tradition, yet behavior seems unnatural." Legal intervention did not stop the patterns, it merely noted their recurrence. The formality of documentation contrasts with the impossibility of understanding what these markings truly meant, leaving an unsettling trace across generations. School inspections similarly provide insight into recurring rituals. Logs from multiple districts list children in isolated groups, chanting or humming in unrecognizable sequences, copying symbols on slate. One inspector, writing in 1924, observed, "Repeated behavior mirrors records from Welch. Teachers puzzled, parents compliant. Unknown origin, unknown purpose." The repetition is striking. Children across counties practicing identical exercises, whether through bloodline transmission, clandestine instruction, or cultural mimicry. The pattern emerges clearly, a legacy of ritual deeply embedded and carefully hidden from outsiders. Folklorists examining oral histories in the late 1960s and 1970s noted similar stories in regions including Harlan County, Kentucky, and Boone County, West Virginia. These accounts describe families where children behaved strangely, whispered songs backward, and drew cryptic symbols at night. One story, documented in a field interview from 1968, tells of a girl whose parents taught her the names of things that shouldn't exist, and she remembered them even when she forgot herself. Such narratives, though anecdotal, align uncannily with the Ashcroft record, reinforcing the impression of a regional phenomenon. The persistence of these patterns extends beyond human memory. Archaeological surveys in Raleigh and McDowell counties, conducted from the 1970s through the 1990s, uncovered chalk traces, disturbed earth, and small, sealed objects in basements and yards. Though fragmentary, the symbols and arrangements correspond exactly with those found in Welch. Artifacts, carefully catalogued and preserved in regional historical societies, show meticulous alignment, as though ritual knowledge had been codified and transmitted over decades. Family names themselves suggest connection. In tax ledgers and census rolls, Ashcroft, Holloway, Stalworth, and Fairchild appear repeatedly in adjacent areas, often listed as active properties even when no census entry exists for the occupants. Letters from 1925 describe interfamily visits and exchanges of objects. Bundles of herbs, hand-copied scripture, chalk. Though the purpose of these exchanges remains speculative, the persistence across multiple families implies a shared tradition, transmitted covertly, surviving through silence and fear. Medical and psychiatric records reinforce the eerie similarity. Asylum filings from 1905, 1912, and 1920 include children exhibiting the same behaviors as the Ashcrofts, drawing symbols, murmuring unrecognized phrases, entering trance-like states, and demonstrating extreme alertness to unseen phenomena. Reports often note the impossibility of diagnosis, concluding that children possess memories or training inconsistent with ordinary experience. The repetition of these symptoms across counties suggests deliberate instruction or a pattern that transcends individual families, a form of regional conditioning that leaves traces on the psyche. Even the landscape participates in this repetition. Field surveys note that the houses share similar layouts: basements, isolated nurseries, and rooms marked for ritual use. Trees, fences, and garden arrangements correspond to chalk and symbolic alignments found inside the homes. This convergence implies a systemic approach. The ritual knowledge was not only behavioral but spatial, embedded in the very architecture of domestic life. Patterns repeat in physical, social, and cultural forms, a network of observance linking otherwise unrelated families. Taken together, the evidence forms a lattice of recurrence. Handwritten symbols, rituals in basements, repeated behaviors, and enduring traces in property, schools, and medical records. The Ashcrofts were the first recorded family to attract notice, but the network extends across multiple counties, decades, and generations. Each fragment, each pattern, suggests continuity, as though an invisible force shapes families into repetition, conditioning children to observe, remember, and participate in practices that outsiders cannot fully comprehend. For decades, the Ashcroft story lingered in archives, whispered through oral histories, and surfaced in fragments of newspapers and court records. Yet the past has a way of bleeding into the present, and by the early 2000s signs emerged that the patterns were not dormant, they were reawakening. Children across McDowell, Mercer, and Raleigh counties began exhibiting behaviors reminiscent of those recorded in 1898, unsettling parents, teachers, and authorities alike. The return is subtle, almost imperceptible at first, but cumulative, persistent, and impossible to ignore. School reports from 2003 and 2007 document cases that mirror the Ashcroft phenomena. In one instance, a third-grade student in Welch was observed drawing symbols in the margin of her workbook, triangles and circles identical to those recorded in the Ashcroft diaries. Teachers described the child as inexplicably alert, reciting phrases backward and humming tunes no one taught her. Similar reports appeared in neighboring counties, often accompanied by anxiety and fear from parents who insisted they had never witnessed such behaviors in their families. These recurring patterns, separated by more than a century, suggest continuity beyond coincidence. Police logs provide additional evidence. A 2005 entry in McDowell County records notes reports of children found drawing chalk patterns on school playgrounds in unusual formations. No parental guidance reported. Symbols match historical Ashcroft case notes. Investigation advised, yet staff hesitant to pursue due to community fear. While law enforcement was initially skeptical, repeated incidents, often linked to children reporting visions, voices, or unexplained presences, forced acknowledgement of patterns that defy ordinary explanation. Social media, surprisingly, has become a modern repository for these occurrences. Parents and students in small towns across Appalachia have posted photos of chalk symbols in yards and playgrounds, videos of children singing in unrecognizable sequences, and anecdotes of objects moving inexplicably inside homes. One Reddit thread, Ashcroft Echoes, documents instances from 2011 to 2019, linking multiple families across West Virginia, Kentucky, and Ohio. Posts are sporadic, sometimes cryptic, but collectively they form a contemporary map of recurrence, echoing the same networks of ritual, memory, and repetition observed in the 19th and 20th centuries. In private correspondence, families report similar disturbances. A mother in Mercer County, writing in 2015, describes waking to the sound of her daughter humming in the dark, tracing symbols on walls. She insists she must remember, though I never taught her. Her eyes are too knowing. I fear what she remembers and what she will pass on. Another note, discovered in a digital archive of Appalachian folklore in 2018, states, "We see shapes in dreams, songs in the wind, and know the Ashcroft influence persists. It is not the past. It is now." These contemporary testimonies suggest the patterns are cyclical, re-emerging when conditions allow, echoing ancestral behaviors in new contexts. Field research conducted between 2010 and 2020 corroborates these accounts. Investigators visiting former Ashcroft, Holloway, and Stallworth properties noted anomalies: faint chalk markings on floors, windows appearing fogged with white residue, and ambient noises reminiscent of chanting. Even empty houses seem active. In one 2014 report, a researcher recorded, a child's drawing remained on a dusty floor, yet no child had entered the property in weeks. The symbol corresponded to patterns from Welch, 1898. These physical traces suggest that the past is not static but imprinted upon space, capable of resurfacing across generations. Psychologists documenting these cases emphasize the unusual consistency. Children displaying Ashcroft-like behaviors show advanced awareness, repeated patterns of speech, and ritualized actions. These behaviors are distinct from known neurological or psychiatric disorders. In a 2017 case study, a clinician writes, the child exhibits memory and knowledge inconsistent with age and experience. Behaviors are ritualized, patterned, and echo historic Ashcroft practices. The source appears environmental, social, or potentially inherited in a manner outside conventional understanding. Such observations blur the line between inherited trauma, cultural memory, and something less explicable. Even in digital environments, evidence emerges. Photographs of playground chalk patterns, videos of children humming sequences backward, and scanned letters describing recent visitation experiences suggest that the phenomenon is adapting to modernity. Social media posts often disappear, accounts are deleted, and threads vanish, reminiscent of the historical suppression only now occurring in the digital ether. The past, it seems, resists both erasure and dormancy. The cyclical nature of these events raises unsettling questions. Is the return purely behavioral, a cultural echo of Appalachian tradition? Or is it more insidious, a transgenerational imprint, preserved in children who are born into inherited awareness? Interviews with local historians suggest both possibilities, that children absorb knowledge from stories, symbols, and behaviors in their families, yet the recurrence also hints at an almost supernatural persistence. Archival comparison of Ashcroft diaries, Holloway records, and modern photographs reveals striking similarities, as though the behaviors themselves are conserved independently of human intention. Even those outside the families report encounters with the returning patterns. Teachers, hikers, and casual observers in Welch and surrounding counties describe white residue appearing inexplicably, chalk markings forming overnight, and sounds that mimic children's voices from decades past. Field reports document that these occurrences often coincide with geographic areas previously associated with Ashcroft, Holloway, and Stallworth properties, suggesting that the land itself participates in the recurrence. The past does not rest. It whispers, observes, and occasionally acts. And so, the question emerges, why now? The resurgence suggests a rhythm, a recurrence shaped by environment, memory, and human observation. The patterns have persisted because they were never fully erased, and they return in cycles, waiting for witnesses who can perceive them. The Ashcroft story, once hidden in logbooks, letters, and oral histories, has re-emerged in modern families, social media, and environmental anomalies. Its return is a reminder that certain histories cannot be buried entirely, that memory and ritual can survive beyond centuries of suppression. In the decades following 1898, the Ashcroft name began to appear in fragmented ways across county records, often in contexts that defy simple explanation. Court filings, property deeds, asylum documents, and school logs reveal a pattern. The name persists, morphs, and reappears as though aware of the observers trying to contain it. Speak the name aloud, some whisper, and the record itself seems to shift, realigning history to accommodate its presence. The Ashcrofts, though vanished, leave echoes not only in memory but in the very architecture of the official archives. Early examples appear in McDowell County court ledgers. A filing from 1902, referencing a dispute over land boundaries, notes, the Ashcroft property, though vacated, is referenced in multiple accounts spanning prior decades. Surveyors report anomalies in deeds, measurements inconsistent with historical plats. Later, in 1927, property tax ledgers list Ashcroft parcels as active, despite no census or occupancy records since 1899. These repeated administrative traces suggest either clerical error or something more deliberate. The name itself asserts persistence, refusing erasure. School records amplify the phenomenon. Teachers' logs from 1915 in neighboring counties record a student's remark. My grandmother said the Ashcrofts are always watching. The student's surname differs entirely, yet the statement implies an awareness of the Ashcroft legacy across families. In multiple districts, Ashcroft appears on attendance sheets, sometimes in faded pencil, other times inked over as if corrected. Historical archivists note that these entries correspond to no known child living in the area, suggesting the name is simultaneously absent and present, a specter in the bureaucratic machinery. Letters and diaries reinforce the idea of self-rewriting history. In a correspondence between county clerks, dated 1932, one clerk writes, Ashcroft references continue to appear in ledgers. We attempt to reconcile, yet the more we delete, the more they manifest elsewhere. The family is gone, yet persists. Another archivist, reviewing the microfilm decades later, adds a margin note. Records cannot hold the name. It finds a way in. Across different generations, the Ashcroft surname defies typical archival containment, recurring in contexts that ought to have erased it. Medical records provide another layer. In asylum files from 1912, a child presents with behaviors strikingly similar to those documented in Lillian Ashcroft. In notes describing the case, the psychiatrist writes, patient reports knowledge of Ashcroft teachings from parents. Family name recalled though unrelated. Impressions suggest transgenerational influence beyond ordinary inheritance. The recurrence of the name in this context implies not only memory but influence. The Ashcroft legacy manifesting in children far removed from the original household, guiding behaviors and symbol repetition. The pattern continues in mid-20th century records. Local newspapers occasionally mention the name in oblique ways: a property sale, a minor legal dispute, a forgotten obituary. Each time, the Ashcroft entry emerges, often without corroborating evidence of life or family continuity. Archivists note irregularities. Microfilm shows alterations, faded notes, and repeated erasures. The more one investigates, the more the name resists suppression. It has a life of its own, tethered to events, locations, and rituals, yet untethered from conventional chronology. Even in contemporary accounts, the name retains a power that borders on the supernatural. Social media posts, Reddit threads, and modern folklore blogs often reference Ashcroft, sometimes by casual remark. Saw a symbol like Ashcroft's on the playground, or family told me to never speak the name Ashcroft aloud. In multiple posts, commenters note anomalies in digital archives. Images disappearing, texts altering, references fading. It is as if the name itself commands the record, asserting continuity across centuries and media. Witnesses recount similar experiences in personal diaries. One resident of Welch, writing in 2010, states, "I wrote Ashcroft on a notebook page and later the page had changed. The letters were distorted, uneven, as if someone else had written them. I do not know what this means, but the name will not stay as it was." Another notes hearing the name in dreams, whispered by unseen voices. Ashcroft is everywhere, yet no one is there. These accounts blur the boundary between memory, reality, and archival trace, suggesting the name itself possesses an agency of persistence. Legal files reinforce the effect. Court records from 1945 to 1960 reveal the Ashcroft name appearing in unrelated cases, sometimes in minor claims, other times in property disputes, despite no living descendants in the area. Archivists examining the files later remarked that cross-references frequently corrected themselves spontaneously. An Ashcroft entry in one ledger would vanish, only to appear in another county's document. The pattern implies that the name behaves like a living element within documentation, resistant to human intervention. The Ashcroft name is also tied to locations. Coordinates listed in property deeds, letters, and oral histories align with houses, basements, and hills previously associated with ritual activity. GPS mapping in the early 2000s confirms a striking correlation. Places of Ashcroft influence consistently correspond with physical locations of ritual traces, chalk patterns, and anomalous phenomena. The name, in essence, is embedded not only in text but in geography, memory, and cultural practice. Across these decades, the repetition is unmistakable. The Ashcroft name endures, rewriting records, echoing in ritual, reappearing in memory, and resisting erasure. The family itself may have vanished, but its name persists as a conduit, a signal through time and space connecting past, present, and the living world. To speak it is to awaken awareness, to observe it is to acknowledge its persistence. Historical records, oral accounts, and contemporary reports converge in this central truth. The Ashcroft legacy is inseparable from its name. By the close of the 21st century, the Ashcroft story has spread far beyond Welch, West Virginia, stretching into counties, archives, and private memories that were never intended to intersect. Yet for all the documentation, investigation, and oral testimony, a sense remains that the story is incomplete, that some knowledge was never meant to be fully accessible. Files end abruptly, letters vanish mid-sentence, and court records include notes of destruction, fire, or sudden erasure. The pattern is consistent. The more one seeks closure, the less the past allows. The final Ashcroft property, the cabin on the western hill, remains largely untouched, though it has been observed repeatedly over the past century. Photographs from 2012 and 2019 show structural anomalies, faint chalk markings, and white haze in windows that do not correspond to weather or photographic error. Field notes describe environmental disturbances: trees leaning away from the foundation, water sources clouded with white sediment, and a pervasive chill in the air that does not correspond to season or altitude. Witnesses repeatedly report that entering the house is to step into a space where time, memory, and observation are fluid. Oral histories reinforce this sensation of incompletion. A 2016 interview with a resident of McDowell County states, "You can never see it all. You can walk the hills, you can read the ledgers, but some things happen between pages, between breaths. The cabin watches, but it does not tell. You feel its attention but you cannot know its intent. The statement captures the essence of the Ashcroft narrative: presence without explanation, continuity without full disclosure. The story persists in fragments, hints, and echoes. Even documents meant to preserve the past are compromised. Letters and diaries collected by the McDowell Historical Society include repeated references to destroyed or missing files. A note from 1947 reads, "Ashcroft records partially destroyed. Remaining fragments insufficient to understand entirety of family practice or ritual." Another from 1973 adds, "What remains cannot answer the questions. Every fragment suggests more than it can reveal." These documents convey not only the material loss of records but the deeper impossibility of comprehending the Ashcroft legacy in its entirety. Modern anomalies continue to mirror historical events. Children drawing symbols in schools, whispered songs in playgrounds, white residue appearing inexplicably, all suggest the recurrence of a practice, influence, or memory that transcends human understanding. Social media posts occasionally capture these moments, yet threads vanish, images disappear, and accounts are deleted. This digital erasure mirrors the historical suppression: files lost in courthouse fires, letters destroyed, oral histories fading, underscoring that some knowledge is guarded, whether by human intent or by the phenomenon itself. Maps and coordinates offer no solace. Surveyors attempting to locate the Ashcroft cabin with GPS in the 2010s found that the coordinates sometimes fail, leading to slightly incorrect locations, shifting hills, or misaligned paths. Archaeological surveys report disturbances in the soil and subtle alignment with symbols discovered decades earlier, yet any attempt to dig or disturb the land is repeatedly denied or met with inexplicable obstacles. The terrain itself seems to resist discovery, as though geography is complicit in the concealment of history. Legends persist alongside documentation. Residents recount that birds avoid the cabin no matter the season, no matter the wind. Children born near the original Ashcroft property sometimes refuse to cry. If they do, a familial story claims the bells would ring. Field notes from 1960s folklore researchers describe these as enduring superstitions, yet contemporary accounts indicate a persistent echo of reality, behaviors and phenomena that cannot be fully explained or dismissed as folklore. The philosophical weight of the Ashcroft story becomes clear in its incompleteness. Was it mental illness or generational conditioning? Ritual or inheritance? Something supernatural or simply misinterpreted human behavior? The more one examines the records, the more questions emerge, and the less concrete understanding is achievable. Researchers, archivists, and locals alike report unease not only at what occurred, but at the very act of observing. Witnessing is not neutral. It changes perception, affects memory, and seemingly alters the record itself. Even the name, Ashcroft, refuses full containment. Speak it, write it, document it, and the traces persist. Across centuries, courts, schools, and letters, the name appears, disappears, and reappears. Coordinates, physical traces, and behavioral patterns all align with its recurrence. The family may have vanished, yet its presence is felt in landscapes, objects, and minds, suggesting that some legacies cannot be buried, erased, or fully comprehended. The story is not merely about individuals but about memory itself, encoded in people, places, and time. And yet, a sense of finality lingers. Fragments of diaries, letters, and photographs hint at closure without closure, glimpses into ritual, belief, and behavior that never fully resolve. The past whispers in margins, shadows, and residue. The house stands as witness. Children repeat behaviors long recorded. Records shift. And the air, the land, and the memory itself carry the weight of a story we were not meant to know completely. If you have discovered remnants, a chalk symbol, a song, a story passed down silently, a document altered inexplicably, tell us. Leave a comment below. Share the fragments you have encountered. And subscribe, because even as records vanish, threads are erased, and memories fade, every observation you preserve strengthens the archive. Every witness you record defies the erasure, ensuring that this story and the families who carried it remain part of the world's memory. Some files will always be missing. Some names will always be burned or erased. Some places will resist exploration. Yet the story continues, carried forward in whispers, dreams, and faint markings. And if you stand at the edge of the Ashcroft cabin or see the patterns re-emerging in your own life, remember, you are witnessing what history tried to hide, and the record rewrites itself with every eye that observes. We were not meant to know this, but you do now.